I woke up to the loud noise of heavy machines. My coffee fell from my hand and broke on the floor as I ran to look outside. In the early morning fog, I saw 7 big yellow bulldozers lined up blocking my driveway. They were digging up the gravel and dirt that had been there for years. Standing in front of them was a woman in a fancy suit holding a clipboard, bossing everyone around. My quiet life on my grandfather's farm was now ruined. I ran outside yelling, "Stop! What are you doing?" I could barely hear myself over the machines. The woman turned to me. Instead of looking sorry, she looked happy about what was happening. She raised her hand and all the machines went quiet. "Mr. Renner," she said in a fake polite voice. "I'm Elaine Prescott, head of the Oakshire Estates HOA. We're closing this illegal driveway today." She waved some papers at me like she had all the power in the world. "You've ignored our warning letters for too long." What she didn't know was that I had worked for 30 years as the county surveyor before retiring here. I knew every property line in the entire county. Before you watch the full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. 6 months ago, I'd left behind 3 decades of service as the county surveyor to retire to my grandfather's farm. After losing my wife Claire to cancer 3 years earlier, I needed a fresh start somewhere peaceful where I could heal and rebuild. This 100-acre property had been in my family for generations, and when my grandfather passed, leaving it to me, it felt like fate. The first few months were exactly what I needed. I'd wake up with the sunrise, spend my mornings renovating the kitchen or fixing the porch railings, and my afternoons planning out my workshop. By early spring, I had the house looking almost respectable and had started clearing land for a vegetable garden. My closest neighbor, Lucy Powell, a retired journalist with a keen eye for injustice, would occasionally bring over homemade pies and share stories about the area's history. It was simple, quiet, and exactly what I needed. That peace lasted until Oakshire Estates, the luxury housing development that had sprung up about a quarter-mile down the road, decided my property was somehow under their jurisdiction. The first sign of trouble was a letter taped to my mailbox about unapproved landscaping modifications. I laughed it off, figuring someone had made a clerical error. Then came notices about my supposedly non-compliant fence line and mailbox. Each one I tossed in a file folder labeled Crazy Neighbors, not giving them much thought. These HOA types get a little power and suddenly think they own the world, my friend Bruce Fletcher told me over the phone. Bruce and I had been friends since college, and now he served as the deputy county clerk, still working at the same county offices where I'd spent my career. "Just ignore them, Jeremy. Your property predates their development by decades. They don't have any authority over you." I should have taken the situation more seriously when I received a certified letter from Elaine Prescott, the Oakshire Estates HOA president. The letter claimed my driveway encroached on HOA land and demanded $15,000 for retroactive road usage fees, or face immediate access restriction. The letterhead was embossed, the language formal and threatening, but the claims were so absurd I couldn't help but laugh. My driveway had been there for over 60 years, long before Oakshire Estates was even conceived. "This has to be some kind of scam," I told Lucy when she stopped by that afternoon. "They can't possibly think my farm is part of their HOA. Lucy's expression turned serious as she examined the letter. "I wouldn't underestimate Elaine Prescott," she warned. "Before I retired, I was researching a story about aggressive HOAs in the region. Her name came up multiple times. She's a former real estate developer who went bankrupt about 7 years ago after a major project collapsed. She lost everything, her company, her reputation, millions of dollars. Now she runs that HOA like her personal kingdom. She's been known to force elderly homeowners to sell by burying them in violation fees." I should have listened more carefully to Lucy's warning. I should have made some calls, prepared a response. Instead, I tossed the letter into my Crazy Neighbors file and forgot about it. How was I supposed to know she'd go nuclear over a driveway that had been there since the 1960s? When I encountered Elaine and her bulldozers that morning, I struggled to maintain my composure. My heart was pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The dew was still fresh on the grass, the morning sun barely clearing the trees, and here was this woman with heavy machinery blockading my home as casually as if she were delivering a fruit basket. "Miss Prescott, what exactly do you think you're doing on my property? This driveway has been here for over 60 years. My family has owned this land since before your development even existed." Elaine's smile didn't waver. "That's a common misconception. According to our records and plat maps, your access road crosses Oakshire Estates common property for approximately 27 feet. We've tolerated this encroachment out of goodwill, but after your repeated refusal to comply with association regulations, The board has voted to enforce our property rights. She handed me a folder containing what appeared to be property maps and legal documents. Even from a glance, I could tell they were either fabricated or severely misinterpreted, but they looked official enough to convince the contractors. I flipped through the documents, noting the official-looking stamps and signatures. They appeared legitimate to the untrained eye, but having spent 3 decades examining property documents, I spotted several inconsistencies immediately. The timestamps didn't align with county filing procedures. Some of the reference numbers followed a format that hadn't been used in years. Most tellingly, there was a surveyor's certification bearing what was supposed to be my signature, but the flourish on the Y was all wrong. I'd never signed my name that way in 30 years of professional work. The man in the hard hat, Arnold Davenport, according to his name patch, shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm just doing what I was hired for," he said quietly. "Miss Prescott says this is HOA property and you're trespassing. We're here to install a permanent barrier." I studied Arnold more carefully. His weathered face showed the lines of someone who'd worked outdoors for decades, but there was a weariness in his eyes that went beyond physical exhaustion. "You don't seem entirely comfortable with this situation, Mr. Davenport," I observed. Arnold glanced nervously at Elaine before responding. "I've got a crew to pay and bills due. Miss Prescott helped me keep my business afloat during the recession when no one else would extend credit. I owe her." The subtext was clear: he was repaying a debt, not necessarily acting out of conviction. While they were talking, I noticed Lucy had appeared from her adjacent property. She was discreetly recording the confrontation on her phone, giving me a subtle nod when our eyes met. At least I'd have documentation of this insanity. Elaine saw my attention shift and turned to see Lucy. Her expression hardened momentarily before she composed herself. "Now, Mr. Renner, we're willing to be reasonable. If you agree to sign our compliance agreement and pay the $25,000 in accumulated fees and penalties, we can resolve this amicably." The amount had somehow increased by $10,000 from the letter. $25,000? I repeated, making sure Lucy's recording caught the figure. "Just last week it was $15,000 in your certified letter. What exactly happened in 7 days to increase the penalty by $10,000? Elaine's smile tightened. "Additional administrative review costs and emergency enforcement measures. It's all itemized in the agreement." She produced a multi-page document with a signature line conspicuously highlighted in yellow. "Sign now and we can have these machines gone before lunch. Otherwise..." She let the threat hang in the air, gesturing to the bulldozers. I took a deep breath, remembering my years of dealing with property disputes as county surveyor. Losing my temper wouldn't help. "Miss Prescott, I need time to review these documents and consult with my attorney. I request 24 hours before you take any irreversible actions." "That's not how this works," she snapped, her pleasant facade cracking slightly. "You've ignored multiple notices. Either sign now and pay, or we proceed with the barrier installation today. Your trespassing ends now." I noticed Arnold and the other workers exchanging uncomfortable glances. They clearly hadn't expected this level of confrontation. One of the younger operators whispered something to his colleague, who shook his head in response. Keeping my voice level, I addressed them directly. "Gentlemen, I want you to know that I was the county surveyor for 30 years before retiring. I suspect there's been a serious misrepresentation of property lines here. If you proceed, you may be participating in property damage and trespassing, which could expose you to liability." Arnold's eyes widened at this revelation. County surveyor for 30 years? He looked back at the property line marker Elaine had shown them earlier, doubt clearly growing in his mind. Elaine quickly interjected. "They work for me, Mr. Renner, not you. Your intimidation tactics won't work." But I could see the seed of doubt I'd planted. "You have until noon to make your decision," she added, checking her watch. "After that, we make the barrier permanent." As I turned to leave, Arnold quietly asked, "Mr. Renner, did you ever work on the original survey for this area, back when it was all farmland?" "I did," I confirmed. "I know every benchmark and monument in this county." Arnold nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression replacing his earlier discomfort. I could tell he was reassessing his position in this confrontation. As I walked back to my house, I heard Elaine on her phone. "He's being difficult. Initiate Plan B." Whatever that meant, it couldn't be good. As soon as I was inside, I called Bruce at the county office. "Bruce, I need your help accessing some records urgently. The Oakshire Estates HOA has 7 bulldozers blocking my driveway, claiming it crosses their property." "What?" Bruce sounded genuinely shocked. That's ridiculous. Your farm predates that development by decades. I'm looking at the county plat map right now, and your access road is completely within your property lines. What's going on? That's what I intend to find out, I replied grimly. And something tells me this goes deeper than a simple boundary dispute. Can you pull all the records related to the Oakshire Estates development approval? Original surveys, amendments, everything. I'm coming in. What Elaine didn't know was that I was already making calls of my own. Bruce was about to help me access records that would change everything, records that only someone with my background would know how to use. Getting to the county building was my first challenge, given that my driveway was blocked. Lucy offered to drive me through her adjoining property, using a seldom-used farm access road that connected to the main highway. As we bounced along in her old pickup truck, she filled me in on what she knew about Elaine Prescott. 7 years ago, she was riding high with her own development company, Prescott Ventures. She was working on a massive luxury complex called the Highlands, condos, shopping, the works. She leveraged everything on it, including investments from some powerful people. Then the economy took a dive, construction costs skyrocketed, and the whole thing imploded spectacularly. She lost millions, some of it belonging to investors who weren't the forgiving type. From what I hear, she barely avoided criminal charges for some questionable financing practices. This explained the desperation behind Elaine's actions. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was someone trying to claw her way back from disgrace. So now she's using the HOA as her personal fiefdom? I asked. Lucy nodded grimly. It's her path to redemption. Oakshire Estates is prestigious enough to rebuild her reputation if she can show significant property value increases. There have been whispers about her targeting certain properties, finding ways to force sales or gain control of strategic parcels. I just never thought she'd be bold enough to go after your farm. When we arrived at the county building, Bruce was waiting with a cart full of document boxes and a worried expression. Jeremy, I've pulled everything we have on Oakshire Estates, plus the historical records for your property, but there's something strange going on. Some of the most recent survey amendments are inconsistent. We commandeered a conference room and began spreading documents across the table. As a surveyor, I knew exactly what to look for. The original development plans from 15 years ago showed a clear boundary between Oakshire Estates and my family's farm, with my driveway completely on my property. But a survey amendment filed just 3 years ago showed subtle changes to the boundary lines, changes that, if legitimate, would indeed put about 20 feet of my driveway on HOA land. This is forgery, I muttered, comparing the documents side by side. Look at the authentication stamps. The newer document has surveyor's office approval, but I was the county surveyor 3 years ago, and I never approved this change. Bruce examined the document closely. The signature, it looks like yours, but it's not, I stated flatly. Someone forged my signature on an official county document. The implications were staggering. Not just trespassing and harassment but actual fraud involving county records. As we dug deeper, we discovered more irregularities. Melora Lawson, a retired judge and former colleague, joined us after Bruce called her for legal advice. This goes beyond HOA overreach, she said gravely. This is criminal fraud. But why target your property specifically? There must be a reason Elaine is so determined to control your access road. The answer came when Bruce uncovered a file that had been misfiled, perhaps deliberately, in the wrong section of the archives. It contained preliminary development plans submitted just 6 months ago by West Ridge Partners, a commercial development company. The plan showed a luxury condominium complex and retail center to be built on what was currently my farm. West Ridge Partners, Melora read from the document. Isn't that run by James Prescott? Bruce confirmed, Elaine's husband. The pieces were falling into place. Elaine wasn't just trying to assert HOA authority, she was laying groundwork for a major development project that would restore her reputation and finances. My farm was the centerpiece of the plan, but they needed my land, and they needed it cheap. But the biggest revelation came when we cross-referenced the original Oakshire Estate survey with the historical markers from my grandfather's property records. Due to a surveying error 15 years ago when Oakshire was first developed, their build had actually encroached on Renner Family Trust land. The calculations were clear. Approximately 15% of Oakshire Estates, including their clubhouse and Elaine's own house, was technically built on my family's land. My God, whispered Bruce. Do you realize what this means? Not only is your driveway completely on your property, but they've been building on your land for 15 years. I sat back, stunned by the magnitude of what we'd discovered. The records were crystal clear. Not only was my driveway completely legal, but Elaine's precious HOA clubhouse was sitting on land that technically belonged to me. But knowing the truth and proving it to bulldozer operators who were taking orders from a very convincing HOA president were two different challenges. I needed more than documents, I needed a plan with teeth. With noon approaching rapidly, I needed to act quickly before Elaine made good on her threat to permanently destroy my driveway. Bruce helped me make copies of all the relevant documents while I called Sheriff Daniel Jackson to request his presence at my property. The sheriff and I had worked together for years on various property disputes, and he had no love for overreaching HOAs after dealing with one in his own neighborhood. "Let me get this straight," Sheriff Jackson said over the phone. "This HOA president has bulldozers on your property based on fraudulent documents with your forged signature, and plans to destroy your driveway? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Meanwhile, Lucy had been busy rallying support in her own way. When she'd returned to the neighborhood, she'd started quietly talking to Oakshire Estates residents who had their own grievances with Elaine's leadership. By the time I returned to my farm with Bruce and our evidence, Lucy had assembled a small group of concerned citizens ready to witness whatever happened next. "Your property rights matter to all of us," Lucy explained as we regrouped on my porch. "If Elaine can do this to you, none of us are safe. Besides, a lot of these folks didn't know about the surveying error. They are horrified to learn their homes might be built on improperly acquired land." Caroline Bennett, the county attorney whom Bruce had called, arrived shortly after. "From what Bruce has shown me, we have enough evidence for emergency injunctive relief," she said. "I've already drafted the paperwork, but we should try to resolve this without court action first if possible." My strategy was straightforward. Confront Elaine with the evidence of the fraudulent survey, reveal the truth about the original property lines, and demand an immediate removal of the bulldozers. If she refused, Sheriff Jackson would be there to enforce the law, and Caroline would file for emergency relief. But I suspected Elaine wouldn't back down easily. People like her rarely did. As we prepared our counteroffensive, Lucy pulled me aside. "There's something else you should know. I've been investigating Elaine since our conversation yesterday. Her latest scheme isn't just about your farm, it's about saving her reputation. The investor who lost millions in her failed Highlands project 7 years ago? He's the primary backer of West Ridge Partners, her husband's company. This is her chance to make things right with him by delivering your land." This additional context made Elaine's desperate behavior make even more sense. She wasn't just after my land, she was trying to save herself from the consequences of her past failures. Our planning session was interrupted by the sound of machinery starting up. Looking out the window, I saw that one of the bulldozers had begun moving toward my driveway. "They're starting early," I said grimly. "Time's up." As we hurried toward the confrontation, I saw that Elaine had brought reinforcements, 2 security guards in uniforms with the Oakshire Estates logo. They stood flanking her like personal bodyguards as she directed the bulldozer operator to begin tearing up the first section of my driveway. "Stop that machine immediately," I shouted as we approached. To my relief, Sheriff Jackson's patrol car pulled up at that exact moment, lights flashing. The bulldozer operator, seeing law enforcement arrive, immediately shut down his machine. Elaine looked like she'd seen a ghost. She clearly hadn't expected law enforcement to get involved. But the sheriff was just the opening act. As I stepped out from behind his car with my stack of documents, I couldn't help but smile. Behind me stood Bruce, Caroline, Lucy, and at least 20 residents of Oakshire Estates, all there to witness justice being served. "Elaine," I called out, "before you destroy any more of my property, there's something about this county and your own community that you really ought to know." The look on Elaine's face as she saw the crowd gathering behind me was priceless, a mixture of confusion, anger, and the first flickers of fear. She quickly tried to regain control of the situation, stepping forward with her clipboard held like a shield. "This is a private matter between the HOA and Mr. Renner," she announced loudly. "I must ask everyone else to disperse. These security personnel will escort you back to your homes if necessary." Sheriff Jackson stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate respect. "Miss Prescott, I'm Sheriff Daniel Jackson. I understand you've got heavy machinery blocking Mr. Renner's property access and have begun demolition without permits. I'm going to need to see any documentation authorizing this action." Elaine's confident smile returned as she handed over the same folder of documents she'd shown me earlier. "Everything is in order, Sheriff. Mr. Renner's driveway crosses HOA property, as these surveys clearly show. We've given him ample notice and opportunities to comply." I watched as Sheriff Jackson flipped through the documents, then looked up with a frown. Ma'am, according to this, these surveys were approved by the county surveyor's office 3 years ago. He turned to me. Weren't you the county surveyor then, Jeremy? I confirmed, stepping forward. And I never approved this survey amendment. That's not my signature. I handed the sheriff our own stack of documents. These are the original property records showing that my driveway is entirely on my land. And there's more. According to the original property markers and surveys, approximately 15% of Oakshire estates, including their clubhouse and Elaine's own house, was actually built on land belonging to the Renner family trust due to a surveying error 15 years ago. A murmur ran through the crowd of residents. Elaine's face had gone pale, but she recovered quickly. That's preposterous. These people are trying to confuse the issue with technical jargon. Our development was properly approved and built according to all county regulations. Then perhaps you can explain why we found these preliminary development plans submitted by West Ridge Partners, your husband's company, showing plans to build luxury condos on Mr. Renner's farm once acquired? Caroline Bennett stepped forward, displaying the documents we'd found. Or why multiple county records related to Oakshire estates contain what appear to be forged signatures? Elaine's composure was cracking. Those documents are confidential. Where did you get those? She realized her mistake immediately as gasps came from the crowd. She had just confirmed the documents were genuine. One of the HOA board members, a woman named Barbara Winters, pushed through the crowd. You told us this was about covenant enforcement, Elaine. You said nothing about development plans or property acquisition. She turned to me. Mr. Renner, is it true that our homes might be built on your family's land? According to the original property markers and surveys, yes, I confirmed. But my issue isn't with individual homeowners, it's with the fraudulent manipulation of property records and the abuse of HOA authority to try to force me off my land. As I spoke, I noticed Lucy moving through the crowd, showing residents something on her phone, of videos and testimony she'd been collecting from other victims of Elaine's schemes. Mark Ruffalo, an elderly man who had joined us, leaned on his cane as he told anyone who would listen about how he'd lost his beloved garden property to Elaine's machinations. The tide was turning rapidly against Elaine, who now looked cornered. In desperation, she played her final card. Sheriff, I want these people removed for trespassing on HOA property. This is nothing but a witch hunt based on outdated records. That's going to be difficult to enforce, Sheriff Jackson replied calmly, given that the property lines themselves are in dispute. And based on what I'm seeing here, there appears to be evidence of record tampering, which is a felony in this state. At that moment, a sleek black SUV pulled up, and a well-dressed man stepped out, looking annoyed. Elaine, what's going on? Why aren't the barriers installed yet? West Ridge's investors are expecting an update this afternoon. He stopped short when he saw the crowd and the sheriff. James? Elaine hissed. Not now. But it was too late. James Prescott, Elaine's husband and president of West Ridge Partners, had just confirmed their real plan in front of everyone. The collective anger from the Oakshire residents was palpable. They'd been used as pawns in the Prescott scheme to rebuild their fortune and reputation. With her scheme rapidly unraveling before her eyes, Elaine made one last desperate play. This is all a simple misunderstanding, she said, her voice artificially calm. Tell you what, Renner. I'll have the bulldozers removed immediately, and we can forget this whole thing happened. The crowd that had gathered went silent. Elaine looked around, realizing that not just me, but the entire community was now standing against her. Did she really think I'd just walk away after what she'd done? I looked at Sheriff Jackson, who gave me a subtle nod. It was time to play my final card. I don't think forgetting is an option anymore, Elaine, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. Not when your actions have affected so many people. I turned to address the gathered crowd, feeling the weight of the moment. The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting stark shadows across the faces of everyone present, Oakshire residents, county officials, and curious onlookers who had been drawn by the commotion. The documents we've uncovered don't just prove my driveway is legitimate. They show that approximately 15% of Oakshire Estates properties, including the clubhouse and ironically Elaine's own home, are technically sitting on land that belongs to my family's trust due to a surveying error made 15 years ago. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Homeowners exchanged worried glances, some reaching for their phones as if needing to document this revelation. But I want to reassure all of you, I continued, that my intention is not to disrupt your lives or homes. The individual homeowners aren't at fault here. I made eye contact with as many residents as I could, wanting them to see my sincerity. What I propose is this: we work together to properly document the actual property lines. Homeowners will acknowledge the historical error and pay a modest one-time fee, perhaps $1,000 per affected property, to officially transfer the land titles and legitimize your properties. It's the right thing to do, and it protects everyone's interests going forward. The relief among the residents was palpable. Barbara Winters was already taking notes, organizing the practical details of how such an arrangement might work. Sheriff Jackson approached Elaine, who had collapsed onto a decorative boulder by the roadside, her head in her hands. "Miss Prescott, I need you to come with me to answer some questions about these altered records and the property damage to Mr. Renner's driveway." As Elaine was escorted to the sheriff's car, I felt no satisfaction in her downfall. Only relief that her schemes had been exposed before more people lost their homes and life savings. James Prescott stood apart, already on his phone with what sounded like his attorney, distancing himself from his wife's actions. The real work of rebuilding community trust was just beginning. But as I looked around at the impromptu gathering of neighbors, some from Oakshire Estates, some from the surrounding farms, all talking earnestly about moving forward, I felt the first stirrings of genuine optimism. The 6 months following what locals now called the Bulldozer Showdown brought remarkable changes to our community. The emergency HOA meeting that night had been predictably heated, with residents demanding answers and accountability. By the meeting's end, Elaine had been unanimously removed as president, with Barbara Winters stepping in as interim leader with a mandate for transparency and reform. The folder Bruce had given me contained damning evidence of a pattern of intimidation and fraud stretching back 5 years. Working with Caroline Bennett, we established a restoration fund for previous victims of Elaine's schemes, funded largely by the recovery of misappropriated HOA funds and properties that had been improperly acquired. Mark Ruffalo was one of the first to benefit, receiving compensation that allowed him to purchase a new garden property where he could restart his beloved rose collection. The legal consequences for Elaine and James Prescott were substantial. The forged documents alone resulted in felony charges, while the attempted property destruction and fraud led to additional counts. Their assets were frozen pending investigation of financial improprieties at both the HOA and West Ridge Partners. But the most profound changes were in the community itself. With the truth about the property lines established, we worked out a fair solution for all affected homeowners. Rather than demanding exorbitant payments or forcing anyone to move, I offered a simple acknowledgement agreement and a modest fee to officially transfer the affected portions of land to the current residents. Once freed from Elaine's iron-fisted control, the residents of Oakshire Estates were overwhelmingly reasonable, fair-minded people who valued community harmony. Many expressed shame over how the HOA had been weaponized against neighbors and outsiders alike. My farm, once the focus of a power struggle, became something of a community gathering place. When spring arrived, I converted 2 acres near the boundary with Oakshire Estates into a community garden where residents from both the development and surrounding rural properties could grow vegetables and flowers together. On a perfect autumn Saturday, exactly 6 months after the Bulldozer confrontation, I hosted a community barbecue that drew over 100 people from Oakshire Estates and the surrounding farms. My driveway, fully restored and now featuring beautiful landscaping on both sides, planted by former HOA board members as a gesture of goodwill, welcomed a steady stream of visitors throughout the day. As I watched the children of Oakshire Estates playing tag around my old oak tree while their parents chatted on blankets spread across the lawn, I reflected on an important lesson. Sometimes the people who think they hold all the power are standing on shakier ground than they realize. Knowledge, patience, and community are always stronger than intimidation and greed. And remember, it's never a bad idea to know exactly where your property lines are, and to stand firm when someone tries to cross them. The small farm that was supposed to be my quiet retirement had become something much more, a catalyst for change, a gathering place for neighbors, and the foundation for a different kind of development than Elaine had envisioned. Not condos and shopping centers, but the growth of justice, community, and trust. Some boundaries, it turns out, are meant to be crossed after all.